I just like I want to remind the Oilam, they had no idea that I was speaking today. I just found out about an hour ago. I did not have a chance to prepare it like I want to, so it's going to have to be the way it comes out. I apologize for that. It was certainly a one-sided miscommunication. The Shulchan Aruch paskins in Siman Kuf Ayin Daled, Seif Beis, Yain Poiter Kol Minei Mashkim. Simple, straight out, halacha without too much complications. Somebody drinks wine, he's now potter from all the other beverages that he's going to be drinking in the same sitting. He doesn't have to make the bracha rishona over it. And the Rama adds that this applies both to bracha rishona and to bracha achrona. Based on the rishona, no difference. Bracha rishona and bracha achrona are the din of yain poiter coming to mashkim. So, let's understand, where is the source of this halacha? Where does this halacha come from? Where does the mechaber get to say that yain is poiter coming to mashkim? Where's the makar for that? And what is the gedder of it? This is what we're trying to explain today, and that Afkeminis Lamaisa. Now, we have no question over here, where is the makar? Because I'm sure those that were in the Shir Hachana saw that it's a Mefurish Gemara. The Gemara brings down a brachas that from Aleph and Beis, in the name of Rab Chia, Rab Chia, Pas Peteris Kol Minei Meichel, the Yain Poiter Kol Minei Mashkim. So the Gemara, Rab Chia says very clearly that just like there's halacha that bread patters all foods that are eaten along with it, so too is yayin pater all the mashkin that are brought with it. So it's a mefurish Gemara. Can't ask a question on the Shulchan Aruch where he gets the halacha, but it seems to be mefurish Gemara brachas to have aleph and base. But in reality, however, that is very not correct, because when you look further down the Gemara in this same sugya, the Gemara says that this Rab Chia is actually arguing on various Amoraim that are brought before and after, Rav Huna and Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. And Rav Papa says that the halacha is actually not like Rav Chia. Amar Rav Papa, Hilchasa, Dvar Maboy Machmas HaSeuda B'toich HaSeuda Ein Tulin Bracha Lo Lifnei V'Lo Nachreim. That in other words, that halacha that Rav Chia says, that pas is poiter kol minei machal, which means, and simply put, that if a person makes hamaitzi on bread, all the other foods which are eaten at the same time that the bread is eaten are also exempt from a bracha. That's not true. We don't pass it like that. We don't pass like Reb Chia. If somebody were to have fruit with the bread, you would have to make a very pure eitz. If somebody were to have potato chips, chocolate, ice cream, whatever it is, pas will not patter all those foods. The only time that pas patters all the other foods is, like Rav Papa says, things which are machmas seuda, or like the Rishonim explain, laf face pas. They're eaten along with the bread, like meat, like chicken, like potatoes, vegetables, foods that are meal types of foods. Those kinds of foods are nichlal totally in the pas. Nothing to do with Rab Chia. The different halacha that Rav Papa says, that Rav Huna says, that Rav Sheshes says. So it comes out that we do not paskin like Reb Chia's first statement that pas is peteris kol minei meichel. If so, it's assumable, it stands to reason to say that we also don't paskin on Reb Chia's second statement that yain is poiter kol minei mashkin, because he says it. He says it as one statement. Just like bread is poiter kol minei meichel, so too is yain poiter kol minei mashkin. We do not paskin like the first part of the statement. It's assumable that we don't paskin like the second part of the statement either. And actually, besides the fact that it's a svar pshuto, one could argue that it might even be a kal v'chaimer, because min asvara chitzayna, one could have said that it's more logical to say that pas will patter all the other foods, more so than to say that yain should patter all the other beverages. Because according to Reb Chia, pas patters foods and beverages. It's much more global, much more general. It patters everything that you're going to have, that you're going to eat. And not just meichel, it means meichel al mashke. But yain is only limited to mashke. So whatever the case may be, but once we don't paskin like Reb Chia, that pas patters all foods, we certainly also don't paskin like Reb Chia that yain patters all many kind of drinks. So Abazai, where does the mechaber have a source to say to paskin that yain patter kol minei mashkin? Very shver mechaber. Truth is that this is the Rambam shita. The Rambam drops the halacha of yain patter kol minei mashkin. We're not going to find in the Rambam that if a person makes a bar paragofen and yain, he no longer has to make a shahakal and soda and any other beverage that he drinks at the same sitting. You're not going to find it. The Rambam is very clear because the Rambam looked in the Gemara and saw that the Gemara doesn't pass like Reb Chia, and therefore if it doesn't pass like Reb Chia by pas, apparently we don't pass like Reb Chia by yain either because one is the same like the other, and therefore there's no room to mechalik, and therefore the Rambam drops the whole halacha. This is, we don't have to assume, but it's mefurish and taisvis. Taisus in the Memalaf and the Beis Diba Masel V'Yayin says clearly that the leis hilchse kavose on this halacha that yain is point to come in a mashkin is leis hilchse kavose. Why? Sharim you pass Poteris and halacha kamoise like psak Rav Papa. We don't pass like Rav Chia in the first part of his statement. So in the second part of his statement that he said yain point to come in a mashkin leis hilchse kavose, we do not pass him like him. Very, very clear. The sheet of the Rambam and Tosfos is very beautiful in the Gemara, and it makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't help us for the Mechaber. And not only that, it'll end up being a stira in the Mechaber's psakim, because here in Kuf Ein Daled, as we said, he paskins yain paita kol min mashkin, which seems to be a Chiya's statement. Yet in Siman Kuf Ein Zayin Seif Aleph, just a few pages down the line, he clearly passes like Rav Papa and not like Rav Chia. That the only time that bread patters all other foods is only bread which is machmas seuda, like meat and chicken that comes along with the bread. But other foods which are normally eaten without bread are not exempt through the bracha of pas. So Mamad Shafas tutzach in the mechaber. Does he hold a Reb Chia? Does he not hold a Reb Chia? A direct steer in the mechaber. And the Rambam and the Tosfos tell us that it's a direct steer, and we pass like neither. Comes the mechaber and makes a spalt between Reb Chia's first statement, which we don't paskin like, and Reb Chia's second statement, which the mechaber paskins like, a big pella. But Laisa, it's not a pella in the mechaber, but it's a pella on the sources of the mechaber. The mechaber has two very good sources. One is called Rabbeinu Yoina. The other is called the Rush. They both say the exact same thing, and they both don't explain themselves. But they both say that even though we do not pass like Reb Chia concerning the first part of his statement that passes Poiter Kol in a Maichel, we do not pass like that. We certainly pass like Rav Papa. Yet on the second statement of Reb Chia that the Yain is Poiter Kol in a Mashkin, that we don't find anybody arguing. Rav Huna, Rav Sheshes, they're not discussing that. They're discussing the Omed Allah of Pas. Since we don't find anybody arguing on that second statement of Rav Chia, therefore we can assume that the Allah is like Rav Chia. And that is, and both the Rosh and Rabbi Yen agree that that's the way to look at the sugya. Halacha l'maisa is like Rav Chia's second statement and not like the first statement. They do not explain the difference. If Manashach, if you don't pass like Rav Chia in the first part, why would you pass like Rav Chia in the second part? All they say is, well, we don't see anybody arguing. If nobody's arguing, we can assume that halacha is like him. So the B'Sheisel clearly says that the source of his psak comes from the Rosh and Rabbeinu Yoina. So we know that there is a machlekes Rambam and Tosfos on the one hand, Rosh and Rabbeinu Yoina on the other hand. Are both parts of Reb Chia rejected from the halacha, or do we divide Reb Chia's first part from the second part? So the Mechaber is very nice, and he follows the Rosh and Rabbeinu Yoina. But now we need to try to explain what's going on in here in Svara, in Lumdus. What is the halacha of yain practical in a mashkin? What is the gather of it? If we don't hold that passes practical in a maichel, why would we drop that halacha, but nevertheless seem to paskin that yain practical in a mashkin? This seems to be the central issue that needs to be explained in order to understand the psakim of the mechaber and the sheet of the Rosh and Rabbeinu which mechaber paces himself on. So it seems to me when you go through the sugya, you'll have two basic mahalachim which are completely different from each other, about how to understand the sugya of yain poiter kol min mashkin. The first mahalach, let's call it the mahalach of the Magen Avram, but it's Magen Avram. Excuse me. Magen Avram Kedarke B'Kodesh is very mikatzer, is very cryptic. So Magen Avram's sheet is developed a little bit by the Pirmigodim, mostly by the Derech HaChaim and other Achronim. And let's try to bring out what they're saying. And the side of what they're saying is also built on a Tosfos, but not the Tosfos that we saw right over here, but it's another Tosfos on the Sugya of Yain, and that Tosfos is Naf Mem Beis Amar Aleph on the third line of the page. It's the Dibra Masel starts from the page before, but on the third line, Tosfos says over there, Svaro, the hashta, and now Yain Poiter called Mine Mashkim. Yain patters all the Mine Mashkim, says Tosfos. It is the most important mashke, it's the main mashke that we have. Who roish lechol mine mashkim. And it is the head, or the most significant of all the other drinks, the lechach hu ikar. And therefore that becomes the main, the haint femin loyal inyan bracha. And therefore all the mashkim that come, because of the yain, are included into the bracha of that you made on the Bar Pri Hagafen. Basically, what that means is that we don't find another mashka, another beverage that has a unique, individualized bracha like the bracha Bar Pri Hagafen. It's the chashivas of the bracha. The bracha Bar Pri Hagafen is such a chashiv bracha that whenever you drink whenever you make the bracha Pri Hagafen, and of course you have to drink a little bit alone because otherwise there will be bracha levatala. So this bracha now becomes a bracha chashuva. So therefore, there's nothing to do with the fact that you are sitting in here and having any type of a kviyus, but just fact alone that you make this chashuv bracha called the bracha Bar Pri Hagafen, this bracha which is kaveh bracha la'atzmoi, and you tasted a little bit of the wine, or even if you didn't make the bracha, but you heard the bracha of somebody else who made the bracha, and you tasted a little bit of the wine alone, the chashivas of the bracha Bar Pri Hagafen includes in it all the other mashkim, and you don't need anything else, not lefanav and not HaRav, because now you made the Bar Pri Hagafen. Which will mean, let's try to explain this in a little bit of a deeper way. The halacha that yain poiter coming to mashkim is dissimilar, is not the same to the halacha that Reb Chia says about pas poiter kol mine meichel. We'll have to say that there's a difference between the bracha that a person makes on bread, which Reb Chia holds is poiter coming to meichel, but we don't pass it like that. But the second part of Reb Chia that says the yain poiter coming to mashke, over there the chashivas of the bracha automatically includes all the other beverages, and they all become seemingly, it's like a lumbus of ikar and tafel. That's the lashon of Tosfos. There's an ikar, the yain becomes the main drink. All the other drinks that a person drinks along with wine are like tafel to it. And because they're tafel to it, therefore they do not require any other type of a bracha. But it's unique to yain, you have to explain, and not by bread. Because we don't pass like Reb Chia that pas is poiter kol mine meichel. We only pass like Rav Papa that when the meat is eaten together with the bread, so then it's considered as if you're eating the bread and the meat is secondary to it. But we don't say the general rule that pas is poiter kol mine meichel. And these achronim don't 100% explain wherein lies the distinction between pas and yain. But it seems what they're saying is the Gemara itself says a different thing. The Gemara in Brachas Mem Aleph and the Beis, the Gemara asked a different shaila. Why is it that when a person makes hamoitzi, the Gemara wants to know, does that include wine as well? And once you make hamoitzi, you no longer have to make a Bar Pri Hagafen? Or hamoitzi does not pater Bar Pri Hagafen? And the Gemara says that it does not pater Bar Pri Hagafen. Even though a person makes hamoitzi, he still has to make a Bar Pri Hagafen on wine. The lashon of the Gemara is because shani yain the goyrim bracha la'atzmoi. Yain is different, that it causes it's goyrim bracha la'atzmoi. There's different interpretation of what that means. But Rashi learns that the reason the yain is goyrim bracha la'atzmoi, what that means is yain is the only food, the only drink, food and drink really, that you eat it or drink it not because you're hungry or thirsty. Yain comes to celebrate an occasion. A person has a bris milah, a person has a pidyon ben, there's erisin, there's nesuin. There's an occasion that needs to be celebrated that we learn from Psukim that ein oimim shira ela ala yain, or like Tosfos says in Psachim, naskiru dedechem miyayin, zichra keyayin levonin. Yain is the way we celebrate occasions, transitions in Jewish life. And therefore, you have to have a kais of yain, recite the Bar Pri Hagafen in it, and that's the shira that you make. That is unique, because that is even more unique than an hamoitzi. Hamoitzi, you don't have that uniqueness. Hamoitzi, you eat when you want to eat bread, when you're hungry. So yes, pas has its own bracha called hamoitzi lechem and aretz, but it's totally with food. It's totally with the achila. The achila of pas requires the hamoitzi lechem and aretz. Over here, even though there's no achila or shtia on its own merits, In other words, the te'im is just not to make it a bracha l'gatala. It's the kais al hayayin, it's the shir al hayayin, which requires this kind of a bracha. That's how we celebrate. It's goyim bracha le'atzmai. Even though you don't need to drink it along, nevertheless, that becomes. Memela, there's a chiluk between the halacha of yayin poiter komin mashkin to the halacha of pas komin meichel lahalacha. Now, Reb Chia Taka held there's no difference. The same thing, just like pas is all machalam because hamaytzim lechem in Eretz is a unique bracha in his opinion. So too is yain. But lahalacha, says the Shulchan Aruch, based on Tosfos, we don't paska like that. Lahalacha, we saying pas taka is not maitzi kol min meichel. Because pas is an important bracha, but nevertheless, it's not as chashav as yayin, which is goyim bracha la'atzmai, which comes even without the requirement or the necessity of eating in order to advance the bracha. So Bazai, since that's the lumdus behind the yain, so therefore yain paita komin a mashkin. It is such a unique, it's such a chashav bracha. Like Tosfos says, lefi sheikar mashkahu v'hu roish lechomin a mashkin v'lechach hu ha'ikar. Really, it's mamash like we said before. It's almost like an ikar and tafel type of a situation. Just like the Mishnah says later on that if a person eats bread and meliach, so you make the bracha and the meliach and the pas is tafel to it. Over here, it's not the exact same thing because over there you're eating it together. One satisfies the other and it makes it edible. But over here, the lumdus of it is that the yain is the ikar, and whenever you make a bracha on the ikar, the tafel doesn't require a bracha or is nichlal in the bracha of the ikar. That's how it goes. And therefore, there's over here also, yain paita komin mashkin works under the criteria of ikar and tafel. And once you make the bracha of the ikar, so then and you have a little bit, you are then yaitza the mightiest of also from the bracha of the mashkin. And it'll come out according to this shita, according to the Magen Avram's derech HaChaim's understanding of the sugya. A person sits in a kiddush Shabbos morning, he's mekadesh, or he hears kiddush from somebody who's making kiddush on the thing, and he drinks a little bit. So then, even a little bit, a minute amount, the halacha will be, that's it. He's exempt from making shahakel and soda and any other type of a beverage that might be served in that kiddush, juice or brumfin. And there's a whole shiloh which I don't want to get involved now in, whether or not that includes even lemon, whether that includes even certain kinds of soups, which are shahakel types of soups. Pashtas, anything which is considered a mashka will go under this rubric of yain paita komin a mashkin, and they will and that's it. It will be potter because the yain became the ikar. Everything else is toughened to it. That's it. Only condition that you require according to this shita is that those beverages which are being mitzi with the yain either have to be on the table at the time, or you have to have in mind in your seichel, in your cup, that you're planning to drink it, even though it's right now not on the table. Like any ikar and tafel halacha. It's really part of the general ikar tafel halacha that exists throughout Shulchan Aruch. And this is just letting us know a chiddush, that a relationship between wine and other beverages is an ikar tafel type of a relationship. And therefore, when you make the bracha of the ikar, you automatically might see the tafel. That would be the shita of the Primigadim and the derech HaChaim as explaining the Magen Avram. We understand according to this, just as add a little lumdus to the zach, the shatim that Tosfos, the hash that we just read before, the hashta yain poiter kol min mashkin. If you look in the Maharsha asks, why does Tosfos even bring down this sugya? Didn't Tosfos before that we read earlier, Dibba Masel v'yain, say that we don't pass on Reb Chia? Tosfos says that we don't paskin like Reb Chia in yain paita komin mashkin, because since we don't paskin like him, but pas paita komin meichel, we also don't paskin like him like yain paita komin mashkin, because it's a group joint svar. That's what Tosfos said before. But all of a sudden, Tosfos is spending 3 lines to discuss the halacha of yain paita komin mashkin, and adds up a svara. Tosfos never said the svara before. Tosfos adds a svara, and now it sounds like yain is paita komin mashkin. It's like a steer in the two Tosfos and asks the Maharsha, and he does not say a teretz. But according to the way we just explained the sugya, there's no steer here between Tosfos at all. Avada, if you look at it from the point of view of Reb Chia, which Tosfos says in Dira Masel v'yayin, once we don't paskin like Reb Chia by pas, we also don't paskin like Reb Chia by yain. Because since we don't hold that pas is all other foods, we also don't hold that yain paters all in a mashkin, because both of those, in Reb Chia's mind, in Reb Chia's perspective, they are similar halachas. And once we don't pass like the first halacha, we don't pass like the second halacha. But now, says the Taisus Vahashta, now that the Gemara, for a different reason, said the new svara of Shani Yain Gegorim Bracha La'atzmai, which we explained to mean that yain is a kind of a beverage which is drunk not just because it requires to quench your thirst, but you do so for different reasons. They do so because of the chashivus of the wine. So therefore it becomes an unbelievable type of a bracha that covers everything else, that everything else is secondary and meaningless and insignificant toward the ikr. So now that we have a new svara, if I Reb Chia svara, that's a new svara. That new svara, and Taisus goes on to explain that new svara, so the halacha would be taken that there is yan puttuk mashkin. So in other words, all what Taisus was saying is, mitzad Reb Chia, we don't pass him like that. But if you could come up with a different svara to explain Yan Kapitik Mashkin, not according to the Gedara Reb Chia, not according to the same gather as Pas Kol Min and Patim, because this particular svara of Taisus doesn't apply to Pas. In Pas, there is no Pas that you only do for the mitzvah. So therefore, that svara wouldn't apply to Reb Chia. This is a new svara. It's the hashta that was niskadish, a new svara. So we could say a nice tikvataya that Yain particular Mashkin, regardless of Reb Chia. And therefore, will come out that Tosfos now is really on the side of the Rosh and Rabbeinu Yoda, and not like the Rambam. Because now Tosfos is saying, you're right, that's Reb Chia, we don't pass it like that. But it's a new svara to say Yain particular Mashkin. So we have shot in the Mechaber, not just in the Rosh and Rabbeinu Yoda, which are cryptic, but it's with Furish and Tosfos that the Mechaber's psak is 100% emes. This will be according to the Mahalach of the Magen Avraham and the Derech HaChaim. Now the Chaya Adam doesn't go this way. The Chaya Adam doesn't want to learn that the halacha of Yain Peitik and Mashkin is the chashivus of the bracha of Bar Priyagofen. Because Lamaisa, what does the bracha of Bar Priyagofen have to do with shakals, with beverages? Well, it doesn't. The whole lumdus that a bracha can be so chashiv and therefore make all the other brachas insignificant. The Chaya Adam doesn't go with that bichlal with that whole halacha. And bichlal, it's really the Chaya Adam doesn't like the fact that what about Hamaitzi? Hamaitzi is also very chashiv a bracha. Yet we don't pass like Reb Chia over there. So why would we pass like Reb Chia like Abba Yain? What is really, says the Chaya Adam, the distinction between pas and yain? It doesn't go for this shtickle Torah that we said over in the name of the Derech HaChaim and the Pri Megadim. And therefore, the Chaya Adam comes up with a new understanding. Chaya Adam says that in the we don't pass like Reb Chia, we pass like Rav Papa. That pas is only patters things which come along with the bread. Not pas patters all foods. No. Pas is only patter things which is where you convey the suda on the pas. So everything else that is a chelik of the kviyas of that suda is nichal and the brach of the pas. Zok the Chaya Adam. There used to be such a thing. Today maybe it doesn't exist anymore, I think, in the modern society. But there used to be, but not from Megillas Esther, that Esther wanted to get Achashverosh and Haman together. She invited him to the Mishteh Hayayin. There's a concept that we see in Halacha called Kviyas on wine. People get together. You can't do this by yourself. People get together. They get together in groups like today at 4 o'clock. We're going to be having a wine party or a wine mesiba, Mishteh Hayayin. And that's a kniyas, and one you bring one wine and another wine, and you make a tayva meitiv, and you sit and you party and you talk and you schmooze, and even some have other beverages there as well. But this is mishteh hayayin; it's kavua on the yayin, and in such a situation, it is similar to Rav Papa, not to Rav Chia. This is just like everybody agrees that when you make a mitzi on bread, the meat is part of the kviyas on the bread. And it's tougher to the bread, and you don't need to make a bracha on the meat, because the main thing is the suda. Over here also by yayin, if the main part of the suda's hayayin is the yayin, all the other beverages that are drunk at the same time are like meat to bread. They're like now the beverages to the wine. And therefore, the kviyas of the wine, it's not the bracha of the wine, it's not the Ma'ipri Agofim. The kviyas of the wine is what decides that this makes everything else toughen to that kviyas. Or it's not even the word tafel really, but it's a word that says, this is what I'm doing now. Right now I'm having a sudas hayayin. And therefore, if I'm having sudas hayayin, the soda is like, it's part of facilitating the wine. This is in the wine meal. And therefore you do not make a bracha chreina. So it comes out, according to the Chaya Adam, this halacha kamat doesn't apply to us halacha l'maisa. A huge difference in understanding this business, because nowadays most people are not kaveh and mishteh hayayin. They don't sit down and say, let's have a wine drinking party. Maybe I'm if you go wine tasting, but that's not a normal thing. You're not kaveh yourself at a wine party. And therefore, your whole halacha of yain paita coming to mashkin doesn't apply in the modern era when people no longer have a mishteh hayayin. So it matters two completely distinct ways, because according to HaRav, it's a very common halacha. All the time we drink wine and we follow it by other beverages and yain paita coming to mashkin. According to the Chayadim, it's a very not common halacha, because we no longer do a mishteh hayayin. Mishnah Brura, very interestingly, chooses a path between the derech hachaim and the Chaya Adam. He's sort of like machriya, a little bit like this and a little bit like that, but he doesn't really follow the lumdus of neither. Because the Mishnah Berurah is saying like this. He doesn't agree with the Chaya Adam that the only time you say yain paita coming to mashkin is if you have a kviyas and a mishnah yain. He says, no, we don't find that from the stimulus of the poskim. But he also doesn't decide, at least not bevados, like the derech hachaim, in understanding of the Magen Avraham, that any drink that you have, this little bit, if you take a kol shehu, and it's good enough, because the Lamdas in Magen Avraham is, Lamais, you made a Bar Pri Hagafen, and you followed up on a kol shehu, which validated the Bar Pri Hagafen, and therefore the Bar Pri Hagafen now is such a chashuv bracha that it partners everything else. No, says the Mishnah Berurah, you need to have a shtir chashuva. You need to drink a malay lugmav, which is, we find in all the shas, it's yisuv daito. That's considered a real drink. If you have a malay lugmav, then the Bar Pri Hagafen together with the malay lugmav becomes the ikr drink, and all the other drinks become secondary. However, if you just have a kol shehu, says the Mishnah Berurah, it would not work, and you would not be able to use the exemption of yain paiter kol min mashkin. So the Mishnah Berurah really over here, the ikaron in principle, he doesn't agree with the Chaya Adam that you need kviyas. And in principle, he agrees to the Magen Avraham that it's really the bracha of Bar Pri Hagafen which patters all the other beverages. But he adds a component. He says if you're going to the bracha Bar Pri Hagafen alone without a shtir chashuva, that takes away from the chashuvas of the bracha. You're not really having a real shtir. And if you're not having a real shtir, so then you can't really have an ikr and a tafel. In other words, the ikr means you're having the ikr, and since you're having the ikr, the tafel is nittul vit. But if you have a shtir kol shehu, you can't call a shtir kol shehu an ikr, even though you made a bracha Bar Pri Hagafen. So it comes out he's like taking part of the Magen Avraham svara, but he says no, it's not good enough. Not because of the Chaya Adam's svara, he doesn't take that either, but we need to have the Magen Avraham svara, but we need to shtam tzu, and love listen to it, that the chila chashuva, or the shtir chashuva that comes along with it, and then, since that shtir chashuva and yain is kaveh bracha la'atzmai, is because of the chashivus, so therefore it's better than all the other foods, and therefore it's even better than bread. Because by bread, you don't say that if you have a meichel chashuv of bread, it patters all other foods, it's only Leontyne foods. So it comes out, we have la'alacha, 3 different shittas. We have the Magen Avraham, which is totally mekel, totally includes all the other beverages, and any type of a drinking of wine, no matter how much you drink, no kviyas, as long as you was on the table before you, you'll be patur. You have at the other extreme, the Chaya Adam, that the command doesn't apply, and only by kviyas alone. And you have this sort of like speak the middle of the road shita, that you only could do, it only works when you have shtir and lugmav. Anything less than that becomes a suffix. Because anything less than that now is a machlokes of derech hachaim and the other poskim, whether or not you could drink, you could be yotzim kol nash. Because Mishnah says if a person drinks a kol shehu of wine, let's say you're tasting in the tasting part of the wine, and all you have is a kol shehu, and you did not drink it lugmav, you end up in a suffix bracha situation. But manashav, what are you going to do? Make a bracha on the other beverages? Maybe you can't because you were exempt. Drink it without a bracha, you also can't because you can't drink without a bracha. So a person finds himself in a situation, nishtahen, nishtaher, and therefore he says he's going to have to make a bracha on a food, or ask somebody else to do mitzvah and bracha, because this person put himself into a situation of suffix brachas. There's a couple of common scenarios where this applies to. The obvious one is Shabbos morning, let's say by a kiddush and shul, and Mr. Shem will go back to shul soon, and it comes out that it's you make the Mekadesh makes Kiddush, and a lot of people run or are Mahader to go ahead and drink a little bit from the Kiddush, right? They want to drink a little bit from the wine, and not all they get is a kol shehu. Nobody gets Malal Lugmav, all they get is a kol shehu. Then afterwards they want to follow it up with a drink of soda. Well, they're called the Mishnah. They can't. They can't make a shakel, and they cannot not make a shakel. So they're going to have to find the solution to that problem. So the truth is, you're not mechuyev to drink from the curse of Kiddush. It's a mitzvah and a muvcher. It might be a nice thing to do, but a person is Yarchei Kiddush whether he drinks from it or not, if he's not the Mekadosh, if he's just Yarchei. So therefore, actually over here, to be machmir, to try to be Yarchei Kiddush, to try to drink a little bit, could lead to a kilkel. Because then when it comes to the drinks that are following afterwards, you end up in a suffix bracha situation, which according to Mishnah you cannot do. Another application of this halacha will be, there is a big shail in the Poskim, the Rishonim, the HaRav talks about it, and it remains a little bit unresolved, about drinking coffee or mostly tea after a meal. You have a meal, and at the end of the meal, your normal regulus is to follow it up with a tea. A lot of people like tea after their meal. There's a big question in the Poskim whether that tea requires a shahakol on that tea. Do we say that it's nichlal in the meal and the pas was pattered that tea as well because it's part of the meal? Or do we say it's really more like dessert and dessert is not included into the pas? And this ends up a big shayla. The Mishnah actually holds that you need to make a shakel on sugar or on something else in order to avoid the suffix. The Chashukah Paskins by from Vadai that tea is not part of the meal and that you have to make a shakel over it. So that's a shayla, a general shayla all the time. If this happens, of course, on Shabbos, where you began the meal with Kiddush and you made a ber priagofen, so the halacha will depend on who you're talking about. The Mekadesh that drank in Meloy Mugmov, so then since he normally has tea in the end of the meal, even though the tea was not on the table at the time that he made the bracha, but it doesn't make a difference because he made the ber priagofen on the yain. He was kaveh bracha la'atzmai. He drank a Meloy Mugmov. His Yarchei, the halacha is like the Magen Avraham and like the HaRav, the Bir halacha, that it's a shtiyah chashuva, and because of that, he would be exempt from the tea, would have the problem. But the people around the table that drank a koshu of that wine have now entered into a real suffix. Now they can't make a bracha on the tea because maybe they were Yarchei already with the yain. They cannot not make a bracha on the tea because maybe it requires it. So these are kind of people are also going to be ended up in a suffix bracha. Now, Rav Elyashiv says a big chiddush. Rav Elyashiv says a chiddush which other poskim don't agree with, but nevertheless that's the shita. He has a general shita like that, but he applies it over here. He says that this halacha of yain peitek mashkim is only about wine, mamish, wine which is mishaker, yain which is misameach, but some grape juice. You don't say yain peitek mashkim by grape juice, even though of course you make ber priagofen on it, but it's not a chashav mashka, and therefore you can't say yain peitek mashkim. Now, a lot of Rizalman doesn't agree with that, Ramesh doesn't seem to agree with that, but nevertheless, that is the shita of Elyashiv, and at least at Suffolk, we have to mischashiv with that shita. Now, it seems to me that according to Mishnah Berurah's hachra, that you need to have a shtiyah chashuva, Rav Elyashiv's svara is very solid, because since grape juice is not a shtiyah chashuva, so therefore, perhaps that you're not Yarchei yain peitek mashkim. According to the Chayyadam, Rav Elyashiv's svara is also very solid, because since he holds that you have to have a kviyas, nobody ever has a kviyas on grape juice. You can't have a mishneh mix another. That doesn't exist b'chlal. So if everybody will agree that there's no kviyas in that case, and if a yain peitek mashkim doesn't happen. But if you learn like pasha, like the Magen Avraham and the Derech HaChaim, that it's telling the chashivas of the bracha, Bar Priagofen, which is a unique bracha that's said on all kinds of occasions, is such a chashuv bracha that all the other brachas are insignificant to it. So then, what's the difference if it's wine or if it's grape juice? Because in grape juice, you also make it by priagofen. Grape juice also you can make it by bris or by pinna ben or by all kinds of occasions. So therefore, the svar of kaveh bracha la'atzmai will apply to grape juice too. So therefore, now the Mishnah Berurah, since the Mishnah Berurah in this machlokes with the Magen Avraham and the Chayyadam and the Chaim held it's a suffix brachas, so now you have an additional suffix. It's like a sveik. If it happens by grape juice, and especially if it happens with a kolshu, but even grape juice shtiyah chashuva will also be part of the suffix, and therefore will be dependent on this machlokes of the achrayim, and therefore this. But again, not everybody's machmir like Rav Elyashiv, but it's another factor to remember in this in the various sveikas that exist in this halacha. Another point is like this from Kveger in the Gillion of the Shulchan Aruch brings down in the name of the Sefer Bate Kahuna that it says a chiddush, which is really against the whole nature of the halacha. But the Bate Kahuna says that this halacha of yain peitek mashkim is only when you drink wine because you want to drink wine. You're thirsty and you want to drink wine. So all the other mashkim are nichnam into this. But what happens if a person drinks wine? Mamash verkehrt. What happens if a person drinks wine because it's a brichas and mitzvahs? He's not thirsty, but as a matter of fact, he just ate a whole meal. But he makes a bar paragofen on the kais of brichas and mazon after he finished the meal, or havdalah, or bris milah. So he doesn't want the wine, but it's a ritual. He needs to do the wine because right now is a mitzvah. So since it's not because of your desire to drink, so therefore you can't say that this becomes the ikka drink and all the other drinks are toughened to it, and therefore you would require to make a shahakal on the other drinks in that scenario, as I state in the Sefer Bate Kahuna, brought down by Rabbi Kiva Eger. It seems to me that this will make a lot of sense according to the Chai Adam, because if you need to have kvius of the mashkin in order for everything else to become tafon, so then one could argue that you could be kaveya if you want to drink down. Okay, Rabbi said, let's sit down and have a party. So that's a kvius. But if you're doing it because you have to, this is what the ritual calls for, so therefore it's not a kvius, it's not a ratzon. So therefore, if you're not doing it because you want to, so therefore you can argue that you have to, and therefore the other mashkin are not mitbal because they're not kaveya on the mashkin. But if you're going to on the yain, but if you're going to say that it's the chashivas of the bracha, which is Kallah all the other mashkim that come along with it, so what do I care why you're making the bracha? What's the difference if you're making the bracha because you want to or because you have to? Oh, but the chashivas of the brachas, it's rosh rishon lechol davar lechol mashkim. Verkehrt. The whole svar is because it's goyim bracha la'atzmai and it's unique. That gives it the whole chashivas. So therefore, it should be svar verkehrt if you hold like the Magen Avraham. And the truth is that the Mishnah Berurah does not, although he usually quotes Rabbi Kiva Eger's chidushim very often, he drops this sticker of Rabbi Kiva Eger, and perhaps because since in principle he passes like the Magen Avraham and not like the Chai Adam, and as long as there's a shtir chashuva, not just a kolshu, according to Mishnah Berurah's achra, yai put to come in the mashkim. So there also, what do I care? But why? The main thing is what. It's not why am I drinking, but what am I drinking? And as long as I'm drinking a shtir chashuva, that will cover it up, and therefore it could be an halacha. He does not paskin like the Bate Kahuna. Another point is there is a machlekes in the achreinim. What will be in the following scenario? If a person first drank a shahakal drink, a cup of soda, he made a shahakal on it. Then, before making a bar nefashos, he drank a revius of wine. And now the revius of wine, he has to make a bracha. He has to make a bracha achrona ala gefen al priya gefen on the revius of wine. The question is, when you make now the ala gefen al priya gefen the revius of wine, are you going to cover the bar nefashos on the drink that you made before you had the wine? And normally, you make a bracha rishona, and therefore patis you from bracha rishona and bracha achrona. But over here, when you drank the water, the soda, you did not have the wine yet. So you made an individualized shahakal inventory. Do we say that now you're chayiv in bar nefashos? Or do we say that no, that since you're going to make ala gefen now, so the ala gefen that you do now will cover the shar mashkin at the same time? Magen Avraham says klar that it works. And the ala gefen that you make now will pater you from the bar nefashos on the drink. So that fits in very good l'shitosei. That since it's all dependent on the chashivas of the bracha, the chashivas of the drink, and therefore, since you drank you drank a revius of wine, so now you're making a bracha of ala gefen. Just like you made bar per gefen in the beginning, you're making the ala gefen now. So the ala gefen that you make in the end covers all the other insignificant brachas, like bar nefashos. It's insignificant in relationship to the wine, and therefore it will be potter, even though chatchila you do not sit down with it. But if you have like the Chai Adam, that you need to have a kvius in order to trigger the halacha b'yayin p'tek coming to mashkin, so then obviously your kvius was not on the yayin. Your kvius was on shar mashkin, and therefore you were never kaveh on the wine. And then if you're not kaveh on the wine, it doesn't make sense to say that you should pater afterwards because you never set the motion for this kind of a kvius in it to happen. It could be kibitaycha, but it's more mistaber that this halacha fits in better according to Magen Avraham and not according to the Chai Adam. Okay, we'll stop over here. Thank you very much for listening.